a little break from running live streams for us, but it's really thrilled that we are running them again, particularly given the changes that DSS are introducing starting 1 April. So first of all, before I start talking about the DSS changes, I just want to remind everyone that these are changes that only apply to customers who have funding through DSS. So that means that if your funding displays as MOHIF or MOHIF respite, or has come through one of the EGL sites, like EGL Christchurch or Waikato or Manawhaka. So all of those types of funding actually come from DSS. So those are the funding allocations that are affected by these changes. If your funding comes through a DHB or is MSD very high needs, those fundings are not anything to do with these changes. They come different funders whose policies aren't changing at this stage. So in terms of what's happening in DSS land, a few weeks back, DSS did announce the very happy news that they will not be reducing anyone's existing allocations. So they had previously talked about that they might need to do that at the same time as they were planning to remove the purchasing guidelines. They were indicating that they might need to reduce people's allocations, and they have recently announced that they won't be doing that. So, alongside confirming that the purchasing guidance that's currently in place and has been since March 18th, 2024, that those purchasing guidelines are being removed from 1 April. So that's very exciting, those two announcements. At the same time, they did also provide a link to a page where they have published more information about how they see flexible funding working after 1 April. So Stef will talk a little bit to that. Well, I think Simon will have a link to where that information is published on the DSS website. Stef will introduce herself shortly, but Stef has been with us for almost a year now, and she's recently been appointed as our General Manager Customer Services. She has been leading a lot of the work in this space to try and understand what DSS are changing, to try and get clarity and prepare us to support you as the customers. So Stef is the font of all knowledge. Sorry, Stef, that's putting a lot of pressure on you, isn't it? As much knowledge as we have about the DSS changes, Stef has it in her head. So I'll hand over to Stef to talk through how we are responding to the DSS changes. And I just want to, I guess, preface that with we have actually only recently received our own, I guess, first in writing view of what DSS would like us to do as a host to support you. So there is quite a lot of change that we need to still understand, plan for. We're not going to be able to change everything on 1 April, and we don't want to, because we believe that that would be really disruptive for you as well. So we will be working through the changes in a really considered way, and doing our best to communicate what we're changing to you before we actually make any changes. So I'll let Stef talk to that, and then once Stef has explained what's changing and what's not, I will come back to me, and I'll just talk a little bit about how we're planning to communicate.
Stef speaking. Kia ora koutou. I am happy and slightly nervous to be on my first live stream, so thank you for having me and thank you for the introduction. As Ellen mentioned, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're working on here at Manawanui, and just take you through some of those bits and pieces of the puzzle, which will hopefully communicate with you quite soon. So the first thing that we're busy working on is updating our portal to show the new tier level for the person or their agent when we get the information from DSS, which we haven't got yet. You can find details about the 4 tiers on the DSS website, and I can see that Simon has shared the link in the chat for you to explore that detail yourself. We're also busy sharing the training that we received from DSS last Thursday with all of the staff. And that will ensure that they can better support you and explain the changes, including what your tier level means. And alongside that, we're creating clear guidance for our staff so that they can help existing customers understand what funding can be spent on after 1 April, particularly where there is no MyDSS funding plan to refer to. We're also updating our processes and systems to help you meet new requirements from DSS. For example, getting prior approval for some purchases. We're going to be creating a form for prior approval, and we're going to hopefully be able to share that with you soon. And I suppose the prior approval process is designed to make it easy to meet the requirements of DSS. For example, it will collect the information such as what the item is, how it supports a disability, whether it affects your budget, and if it will, what your backup plan is so your support can continue. And one thing I'd like to call out is that giving clear, complete information at the time of filling out the prior approval form will help us approve those requests faster. The other thing that we're doing is we're looking at our onboarding support for people who are new to IF, and they'll be referred to us by the NASCs with the MyDSS funding plan. So those are just a few of the things that we're busy working on, and we're going to share as we develop those, the processes for yourselves. We did want to just call out a couple of things that are not changing, and those are the expectations from the funders around you must stay within your budget for that funding period. They've been quite clear about that, and that you're only using the budget for supports provided between the start and end dates of the allocation period, and you can't claim against an allocation that hasn't started, or for items that were bought before the start date. And in line with the verification requirements, you'll still need to keep your receipts and the paperwork and all of those normal things that we require. And lastly, if we do give you money in advance to buy an item based on a quote, you will still need to send us the receipt within the 1 month. So that's a little bit about what we've been working on. So I'm going to hand back to Ellen.
Ellen speaking. Thanks, Stef. We will have time to take some questions at the end of this. So don't worry, we will come to your questions if you put them in the chat. Just in terms of communication, I just wanted to obviously talk about what our approach is going to be. We did receive some feedback from some customers that they were a little bit disappointed that we weren't communicating more information and more detail in advance. So I thought it would be good to explain that while we have had some really good interaction with DSS in the lead up to their announcements, that interaction has allowed us to pass on feedback from customers to inform the decisions that they're making. But they don't actually communicate the decisions that they make to us any sooner than they communicate it to everyone, which is great in a sense. You guys get to find out everything as soon as possible. They're communicating things out to you as quickly as they can. But it does also mean that for the things that are within DSS's control, like what their policy is going to be, how the funding can be used, what information is going to be required of people to manage the funding, that kind of thing. We don't actually have any information to provide you earlier. And the last thing that we want to do is speculate or misinform people and create confusion and stress and have things going back and forward. So, we have made a decision that we will only communicate information that is confirmed to be changing, and we will take quite a, I guess, a steady approach to implementing the changes. So it's going to take us a little bit of time to adapt our processes and systems, and also for our staff to feel really confident that they're answering the questions correctly. It might take all of you a little bit of time to adjust to the changes, even though the changes are, I believe, really positive. It's still new processes to go through, changes in systems, changes that might obviously something you just need a little bit of time to get used to. Our approach to that is always going to be with an intent to support you. So if we, if you approach us thinking that you'll be able to do something, and we have to explain to you what is required in order to get through that and whether it's possible or not, our approach is always going to be with the intent to support you to meet the funders' requirements, so that you continue to have access to flexible funding long into the future. So as we get more detail from DSS, we will absolutely keep sharing that with all of you as soon as we can. We will also, as we're working through what we can change and when, for instance, as Stef was saying, we're currently working on how are we going to display that information about what tier you're on in the portal, because we want it to be easy for you to see. So we're working through that. As soon as we have worked out how we're going to display that information, we will communicate to all of you that this is where you'll be able to see it, and we will make sure that you understand how that will look visually in the portal, and what your options are if you are not able to look in the portal to find out what tier you're on. Also, the pre-approval form, for those of you who have used our purchasing support request form in the past, the purchasing prior approval form will be reasonably similar to that, in the sense that it would be the same process of filling out the form online and then submitting it, and we will look at it and then get in touch with you. But the content will just reflect the funders' new requirements rather than the purchasing guidelines that have been in place for the last 2 years. And I think that's about it. I'm really keen to hear what questions people have for us.
Simon speaking. Wonderful. Thank you very much to you both. There's been a huge amount of questions that came through on our Facebook post, and we've sort of covered a lot of them. But one that has come through in a few different veins that I think maybe Ellen you could cover altogether is around the topic of respite. People are keen to get an understanding of will other forms of respite be possible? Is there the expectation that all costs are related to the disabled person specifically? Is there anything you can kind of cover off from that aspect?
So from what DSS have communicated and published on their website, respite for caregivers is an important part of policy. So they've communicated this essentially in terms of the new My DSS funding plans and what they will look like. But respite, funding to support respite, is going to be one of the categories for funding that comes through. From 1 April, for people who don't come through with a My DSS funding plan, a respite activity would be considered in the same way that a support that is specific for the disabled person. So the same process, the same requirements in terms of pre-approval, and I think what is a really positive shift in the acknowledgement that ultimately the responsibility sits with the person or the agent to manage the budget and to determine what are the supports that are needed within that allocation period. And if respite is, a very critical part of the support package, providing support, then my understanding is that it should be allowable for the personal agent to put in that request for support, and that it should be allowable.
Simon speaking. Thank you, Ellen. This one you may not be able to answer completely, but it would be good to get your insight. BC says, come October this year, when reassessments recommence, based on the new assessment tools, are reductions in current funding allocations a high possibility?
I'm afraid I don't have any insight into that. That certainly isn't something that they, I guess, are flagging at this stage. I think it's just that when people do have their reassessment, which won't necessarily be within, instantly after October, it could take years for them to go through their usual process of reassessing, the full reassessment, that they will be looking at what supports are needed from that point on, which might be different to the supports that were needed in the past, because things change for a lot of people. They haven't indicated that they need to reduce allocations overall over time. So, sorry, short answer is we don't have any insight into that. Long answer is we haven't yet had any signals that that is what they're intending to do. But we are aware that the new policy does provide the NASCs with more transparency about how a person is spending their funding, which is intended to support that planning at the reassessment, to look at what supports have they been accessing or utilising in the past, so that it can inform what supports they might put into their budget. So there is a possibility, I suppose, that if someone is spending their money on things that the NASC does not believe are justified and equitable with other people who need supports in the community, that they might decide that that component of the funding is not actually required in future. So I don't want to scare any horses, particularly because I'm aware that after the March 18th changes, some people were just so scared of making a mistake or what they could or couldn't do that they actually just stopped using their funding entirely, which is a real shame, because we know that the support need is there. So, I would encourage you to continue accessing the supports. We are here to help you to make sure that you understand what the funder needs to justify any particular claim. Just keep in touch with us. We're here to help.
Simon speaking. Thanks, Ellen. And I can just see a comment from Catherine, and forgive me, I may have confused people with the way I read out that comment, but DSS have said that all reassessments that create a DSS funding plan have paused until October this year, but you would only get reassessed as your funding allocation renewed at its renewal date, but it could be a year or two later, right? So instead of people all getting a reassessment in October this year, it will just restart from October and as your allocation renews. So hopefully that clears up anybody else who may have got confused by the way I asked that question. Oh yes, so the next one I was going to ask was where's the name? Kerry was wanting to know about specialists and therapists that aren't offered through DHBs, or they aren't offered, or they aren't eligible to receive it through the primary healthcare system. Is there any insight you can provide on IF's ability to cover those costs?
I think I'll, sorry, Ellen speaking. I'm actually going to refer that one to Stef.
Stef speaking. There is definitely a section on complementary therapies, and complementary therapies will be one of those things that needs prior approval from your host. And the complementary therapies will need you to provide us with some information around what it is, maybe who's referred you, and ensuring that it isn't available elsewhere. And so our understanding of that is, as long as all of that criteria is met and it doesn't impact your budget and it supports your disability need, then you would be able to access those complementary therapies.
Simon
Yeah,
speaking.
so Sorry, Ellen speaking. I guess what's different from the current model is that under the current purchasing guidelines, they were quite explicit about if it could be funded through a different avenue. So if it should be funded through the health system, even if the health system hasn't prioritised that particular treatment for you, then you couldn't use your IF on it. Whereas without the purchasing guidelines in place, if you have sought to access that therapy through what is meant to be the primary channel and you have not been successful, then you do actually have the choice to use your IF funding for that, as long as you go through that prior approval process and you can confirm that the support needs of yourself or the person that you're managing the budget for will not be negatively impacted by the use of part of the funding for that particular therapy. Is that correct, Stef?
Yes.
I should fact check myself.
Yep.
Thank you.
Simon speaking. Since we're on the topic of prior approval, Stef, perhaps you could just clarify the difference between overseas travel and then what is currently not permitted, which is domestic travel, and how prior approval relates to different travel plans that people might have.
So my understanding is overseas travel is its category on itself, and I think we've always had this need to contact us about overseas travel and understand that. And so for domestic travel, I think it's just going to follow the same parameters around all of those other things around, can we connect it to your disability? Is it in your plan for the year? And what's the cost of it as well? So if it's going to be over $1,500, or depending on your tier, do you need to get prior approval? And as long as we've got all of that information, again, back to that flexibility, it would be approved and able to be used.
Simon speaking. Thank you both. So Stephanie's asking, who is doing the plans? Will this be the NASC, and is everyone going to have a new plan?
Stephanie speaking. So if you are new to IF after February or March, your NASC will do your My DSS funding plan with you, and they will pass it to your host, so ourselves at Manawanui. If you're an existing customer of Manawanui, we will use your ISP as your plan. And as we work through some of these new processes, if it becomes clear that your ISP does not have the level of detail that we would need for a My DSS funding plan, we'll actually start to work with you to create more of a detailed plan. And that will then mean that the prior approval process or the decisions around your purchases should be easier and faster for you.
Simon speaking. Thank you, Steph. And I believe if somebody hasn't looked at their ISP for quite some time, if you did join Manawanui in the last few years, it will be saved on your profile page. But if you're quite a long-term customer, then we may have that saved somewhere in our back office somewhere, but you may also have a copy of it in your emails. But yeah, it's a good time to reacquaint yourself with what information you have in the portal, especially on the profile tab, because your ISP will most likely be there, and you can review the detail, and then you can have a good insight as to whether you may need to work with us to add some more information to it or not.
Or sorry, Ellen speaking, or update the information, because if your ISP is quite a few years out of date, and things might have changed, we're not going to try and say, no, it's not in your ISP, therefore it can't be done. You know, as I said, we are here to work with you. And if there is something that you have a need for, then we would encourage you to ask us, and we can help you to work through, do we actually need to update the ISP, or is this just a prior approval kind of a one-off thing? Yeah, we'll work through that with you if you have any questions about that.
Simon speaking. So just noticing we're very close to needing to wrap things up, and I was reminded earlier today that just to mention the minimum wage increase and the KiwiSaver increases that we've talked about a few times already on live streams and in the newsletter. So just a reminder that those are coming up. We will be handling the minimum wage increase or hourly rate increase mostly on your behalf, but please make sure that your employees are aware of the KiwiSaver rate changing, so that if they want to take action before the change is made automatically, that they do so in time to give us that letter from IRD. Just looking at the last comments. Yeah, I think it is a good time to wrap things up quickly. So I'll go to Stef and then Ellen. Is there any final comments for the Manawanui customers just about the upcoming changes before we say goodnight?
Stef speaking. I think it is just that, to reiterate Ellen's earlier message, we got to work through these changes together. We might not always get it right, but you know, the aim is to support people to understand, to take them through this. So just patience, and yeah, we will definitely do this together as a team.
Simon speaking. Thank you, Stef. And to you, Ellen.
Ellen speaking. I tautoko exactly what Stef said. We want to work with you through these changes. So, you know, if you have questions, ask us. If you think that there's something that we need to communicate better, tell us. We're here to listen. Thank you.
Simon speaking. Fabulous. Thank you very much to you both. Well done, Stef, for joining us for your first time. There was one comment that actually celebrated your success as a first timer, so I'd say that's a win all around. Thank you very much to everybody who tuned in. It is good to be back in the hot seat, I guess, and I will be back on live streams from here on out, back at work full time from next week. Fingers crossed. Everything goes smooth, but yes, we'll be working through these changes together, supporting you as best we can and keeping the communication channels open as much as possible. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a lovely evening, and we will see you all again next week. Ka kite.
Ka kite.